Most folks don't ride toward fire, especially not in the middle of winter with the wind cutting like a blade and the sun bleeding out over the hills. But that's exactly what Levi McAllister did that night, when he saw smoke curling up past the trees like a warning whispered to the sky. Levi wasn't one to go looking for trouble anymore. He'd already buried too many pieces of himself in the red dirt and snow of the frontier. Used to be a cattleman, tough and loud like the rest. But after the war, and the loss of his wife, he built his world small, a log cabin tucked between pines, a dog named Cooper, and silence that didn't ask questions. That night he'd been out checking on a calf lost in the snow when he spotted it. Just a sliver of gray smoke, too thin for a chimney, too steady for a campfire. Something felt off. Cooper barked low, uneasy. Levi adjusted the scarf around his neck and muttered, "Let's go see what the wind dragged in." By the time he reached the clearing, it was near dark and the fire had grown hungry. The small cabin at the base of the ridge was half swallowed in flame, the roof buckling. He jumped from his horse, boots breaking through the frost, and called out, "Anyone inside?" No answer. Just the crackle of burning wood and the low roar of something ending. Then he heard it. A voice. Weak. A woman's. "Help." He didn't hesitate. Levi wrapped his coat tight, covered his mouth, and ran in. The heat hit him hard, smoke stung his eyes, but he found her huddled near the hearth, half-conscious, her shawl smoldering. She was small, older, skin like parchment, eyes wild with fear. "Got you," he whispered, lifting her as the beams above groaned. "We're not done yet." He carried her out just as the roof gave way behind them. Outside, the cold air was like a slap, but it kept them alive. He laid her down by a fallen log, wrapped her in his own coat, and gave her a sip from his canteen. She coughed, eyes blinking against the wind. "My name's Addie," she rasped. "Levi," he nodded. "You're safe now." She looked back, at the fire, what used to be her home, and her face didn't crumble like he expected. Just this calm sadness, like she'd seen worse and lived through it. He asked her what happened, but she didn't say much. Just that the fire started fast, maybe the stove, maybe not. Said she hadn't seen anyone in weeks, not since her son left for the mines. Then she reached into the folds of her skirt and pulled something out. A small bundle wrapped in wax cloth, scorched at the edges. This survived," she whispered. "I was gonna burn it tonight. Let the fire take it. But maybe you were meant to find it instead." He opened the bundle. Inside was a letter. Old, the paper yellowed, but the ink still clear. His eyes moved over the first few lines and froze. The name at the top was his. But Addie was already closing her eyes, her breath slowing. "Don't leave me out here," she murmured. "You won't," Levi said softly. "You're coming home with me." As he lifted her onto his horse, the letter still clutched in his coat. He didn't know what the rest of it said, only that something in his life had just changed, and it hadn't even finished happening yet. "But before we come back, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story hit home for you, make sure you're subscribed, because I've saved something even more special for you tomorrow." Levi didn't sleep much that night. He'd made up a cot near the fireplace for Addie in his cabin, wrapped her in thick quilts, gave her some broth, and sat nearby, listening to her breathing, light, steady, but fragile, like an old branch in wind. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows. Cooper curled at Levi's feet, ears twitching every time Addie stirred. But it wasn't the cold or the wind or even the faint crackle of embers that kept Levi awake. It was the letter. Folded, tight and resting on the table beside the lamp just inches away. He hadn't opened it fully, only read those first lines. Enough to know it was addressed to him in handwriting he hadn't seen in almost 20 years. And the signature? Sarah. His wife's name. Except Sarah had died. That much he was sure of. He'd buried her with his own hands beneath the cottonwoods, marked the spot with a cross made from split fence posts. So how in God's name did a woman he'd never met hand him a letter from the dead? When the sun came up, soft and gold through frost-covered glass, he finally unfolded the letter. His hands shook more than he liked. The paper was brittle, the ink faded in places, but the words were still strong. Sarah's words always were. "If this finds you, Levi, then you've lived longer than I thought you would. You were always braver than me, staying behind when I left. I never told you the full truth, never had the courage," and when he stopped reading. "Left?" he whispered out loud, barely believing it. He had always believed she died during childbirth, lost somewhere between blood and snow on the way to town. That's what the midwife said. That's what the preacher told him when he came back, so who left? Who lied? Addie stirred behind him, coughing into her sleeve. He turned to find her looking at him, eyes clearer than the night before. You read it? She asked softly. He nodded. I promised her I'd give it to you, but I was never sure if I'd do it. Not after everything. Everything what? She didn't answer right away. She looked toward the fire like she was watching something he couldn't see. I was there when she left, Levi. I was the one that helped her. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought maybe it would save you both. Levi's jaw clenched. I buried her. They told me she died. No, Addie said, her voice trembling now. She didn't die. She ran. The words hung there, thick and heavy in the warm air. Addie's eyes filled with tears, but her voice steadied. There's more in the letter. You need to read it, Levi. All of it. She explains why, what she was afraid of, and what she hoped you'd do, if you ever found out. Levi turned back to the letter, but the words blurred now. He was shaking. He felt like a man digging up an old grave only to find it wasn't his wife inside at all, but some stranger with her name. She was scared, Addie whispered. But she never stopped loving you. Levi didn't speak for a long time, just stood there, letter in hand, eyes out the frosted window. In the distance, the mountains rose quiet and unchanged, like they always had. But something inside him had shifted. A name he thought he'd buried was alive again. And behind it, a truth he wasn't ready for. Not yet. But he would be. For 2 days, Levi didn't say much. He moved around the cabin like a man sleepwalking. Feeding, the horse checking the woodpile, boiling stew over the fire. Addie rested most of the time, her breathing slow but stronger. And Levi. Levi read that letter over and over, like maybe if he looked hard enough, the past would rewrite itself. But it didn't. The words were still the same. Sarah had left him. Not because she didn't love him, but because she was scared. Scared of something she never said out loud while she was alive. And that fear led her to do the one thing Levi never thought possible. Take their child. He hadn't known the baby survived. Not until Sarah wrote it clear in that letter. I couldn't raise her in that world, Levi. Not with the shadows that followed us. I took her somewhere quiet. Somewhere I thought she'd be safe. I never wanted to keep her from you. I just didn't know how to come back. Their daughter, alive. Addie sat across the table now, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching him with those same tired eyes that had seen too much. She hadn't said anything more since the first night. But this morning, Levi finally looked up from the letter and asked the question that had been burning a hole in his chest. Where is she? Addie didn't blink. You mean the girl? He nodded. Addie took a long breath. Her name's Clara. She grew up strong, stubborn like her mother, always asking questions, always pushing back. She lives out near Red Bluff now. Got a little house by the river, teaches school when she can. She's 22. 22. Levi whispered, barely breathing the word. He did the math in his head. That would have made her born just weeks after Sarah disappeared. All this time, all these years, he'd ridden through that town more than once, probably passed her on the street. Never knew. She doesn't know about me, he said. It wasn't a question. No, Addie answered. Sarah told her bits and pieces, but she never gave her your name. Said it'd be easier that way. Cleaner. Levi's eyes dropped to the wood grain of the table. Cleaner for who? Addie didn't respond. Just looked down at her cup like maybe the tea inside could change the past. The fire cracked. Outside, the wind pressed softly against the logs. After a long silence, Addie said something Levi didn't expect. You should go to her. He looked up, startled. And say what? Addie's voice was quiet. Say what's true. Levi stood slowly, walked to the window. His breath fogged the glass. Snow still dusted the trees, but the sky was turning brighter, softer. Like the edge of spring was starting to show. He pressed the letter to his chest. I don't even know if I can face her. She deserves to know who she came from. Addie said gently, and so do you. He stayed by that window a long time, staring into the white silence. Inside, something had cracked. Not broken, but opened. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking backward toward what was lost. He was looking forward, toward what might still be found. Levi packed light, a saddlebag of essentials, a worn coat. Sarah's letter folded and tucked inside his chest pocket where he could feel it against his heart. He didn't say much as he saddled the horse, just gave Addie a long look, filled with something close to gratitude, maybe forgiveness. Or maybe just the quiet peace that comes after years of noise. "You'll be all right?" he asked her, tightening the strap. Addie nodded from the porch, wrapped in a shawl, snow brushing her boots. "I'll be fine. Been living alone long before. You pulled me from that fire." He looked at her, eyes soft. "You shouldn't have been out there alone." Addie gave a crooked smile. "Neither should you." The trail to Red Bluff wound through snowy hills and wide, open plains. The cold bit his face, but the sky was clear and high, endless blue broken by the occasional hawk circling above. Levi rode in silence most of the way, save for the creak of leather and the soft thud of hooves against frozen ground. He passed old fence lines, frost-bitten pines, abandoned cabins now slouched with time. This was the land he knew best, wide, empty, and full of memory. But this time he wasn't riding to forget. He was riding to remember. At night he camped beneath the stars, built a fire, fed Cooper scraps, and stared into the flames until sleep came. The letter never left his pocket. He'd read it again before sleep, Sarah's voice echoing back to him like wind across a canyon. "If you ever find Clara, tell her I was sorry, not just for leaving, but for letting my fear speak louder than my love." Red Bluff came into view on the third day, a small town tucked near a bend in the river, with a single main street lined by wooden storefronts and a white steeple rising at the far end like a finger pointing toward heaven. It wasn't much, but it was alive. Children played near the mercantile. Smoke curled from chimneys. Somewhere in this little stretch of dust and rail posts was the daughter he never met. He stabled his horse and walked, boots crunching snow, hat pulled low. He felt out of place, like a ghost drifting through someone else's dream. At the schoolhouse, he stood outside the fence and watched. The door swung open just as the bell rang, and children poured out like wind-blown leaves. A woman stepped into the doorway, tall, slender, dark hair pinned neatly, long coat pulled tight at the waist. Her voice rose over the laughter. "Don't forget your letters, and wrap those scarves tight, all right?" Levi froze. He didn't need to ask her name. Something in the way she stood, the way she smiled gently at a little boy who had dropped his books. It echoed Sarah in a way that cut deep and sweet all at once. It was like looking at a song he hadn't heard since before the war, and somehow every note still lived inside him. He didn't approach. Not yet. Just watched as she walked the children to the edge of the fence, waved goodbye, then turned back, into the empty schoolhouse. Levi stood there a while longer, heart hammering like it did when he was a boy. He wasn't ready, but maybe he never would be. That didn't mean he couldn't try. He walked back to town, found a room above the saloon, and sat down with a pen and paper. He started the letter slow. "Clara, you don't know me, but I've known your name for 3 days and I haven't stopped saying it in my heart since—" Clara almost didn't open the envelope. It was resting in the wooden mailbox outside the schoolhouse just before sunset. No return address, no stamp, just her name written in a careful hand. Not the messy scrawl of a student, not the rounded loops of her fellow teachers. This handwriting was older, steadier, like it came from someone who didn't write much anymore but meant every word when they did. She stood by the school fence, for a long time, letter in hand, the wind teasing at her coat. The hills in the distance were darkening to gold. Somewhere a dog barked, but Clara didn't hear any of it. She knew this writing, not the man's, but the note inside. That voice, that was her mother. The first words hit her like a horse's kick. "Clara, you don't know me, but I've known your name for 3 days and I haven't stopped saying it in my heart since—" Her knees went weak, and she sat right there on the bottom step of the schoolhouse porch, boots in the dust, letter trembling in her hands. She read every word slowly, then again, then again. There was a kind of careful ache in the sentences, like the writer was afraid of breaking her. Or himself. He told her everything. How he met her mother in a mining town near the Wyoming border. How they loved hard and fast and quietly. How he lost her one cold morning and spent the next 2 decades trying not to feel anything at all. He didn't beg. He didn't ask for anything, he just wrote the truth, he signed it simply. Levi, and folded inside was something else. Another piece of paper, yellowed with age, torn on the edges, a letter from her mother. If she ever finds you, Levi, please, tell her I loved her more than the sun on my back and the sky above our heads. Tell her she was the only thing I ever did right. Clara stared at her mother's handwriting for a long, long time. The page caught a tear before it reached her. And that night she didn't go home. She stayed in the schoolhouse, lit a small fire in the stove, sat by the light with both letters on the table, hands folded like a child in prayer. She didn't sleep much, but she thought deeply about the man she'd never met, about the ache in his voice, about all the questions she never thought she'd get to ask, and now might finally have the right to. Morning came slow. She walked into town just as the sun cleared the hills. Her steps weren't hurried, but they were sure. She stopped in front of the saloon, looked up at the window above, then took the stairs 2 at a time. When Levi opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, hat in hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but Clara beat him to it. I don't know what this means, she said, holding up the letters, but I want to hear it from your lips. Levi nodded, gently stepped aside. She walked in. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the first step toward something new, something whole. The room was still, save for the ticking of a dusty wall clock and the quiet sigh of the wind through the shutters. Levi poured 2 cups of coffee, thick, bitter stuff boiled in, a dented tin kettle, and set one down in front of Clara. She didn't touch it. She was watching him, not with anger, but with a kind of quiet study, like she was trying to decide if the man sitting across from her matched the one she'd read in that letter. Levi sat down slowly. I don't expect anything from you, he began. His voice was rough but steady. Not even your time, but I owe you the truth, all of it. Clara gave a small nod. Then tell me. And so he did. He told her about Sarah, how they met in a mining town called Slate Ridge, when he was still young and broke, full of fight and looking for nothing but work, and a warm place to sleep. She was cooking in the boarding house, barely more than a girl herself, but fierce and kind in a way that stopped him cold. He told her how they'd carved out a life together for a while, how Sarah used to hum while stirring stew, how she loved wildflowers more than jewelry, how she'd sit on the porch and write letters to people she never mailed because she didn't believe anyone was listening, and then how one morning he rode off for a few weeks of trail work, just enough to keep them fed, and came back to nothing but an empty room and a note that simply said, "Forgive me." He searched. God, how he searched. Through every mining camp, every ranch post, every halfway town where a woman might find work or shelter, but Sarah was gone. Disappeared like smoke off a fire. I thought she didn't love me, he said, voice breaking for the first time. Thought maybe she got scared, or found someone else, so I hardened. Buried it. Never even imagined. He looked up at Clara. I never knew you existed. Clara's eyes were glassy, but her hands were steady. She said you were kind, she whispered. That you were steady. That you deserved better than a girl running from her own past. Levi stared at the flame in the oil lamp between them. I would have stayed. I would have raised you both. I know, she said. It was quiet after that. Not awkward, just full. Like the silence wasn't empty anymore, but holding something sacred between them. After a while, she took a sip of the coffee. It had gone cold, but she didn't seem to mind. I have a question, she said, setting the cup down. Ask. Why'd you write the letter? Why now? Levi hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out the folded page. Addie's note, the one that came with the old letter. She gave me this, he said, right after I pulled her from the fire. Said it belonged to me, that I needed to make peace with whatever I'd left behind. Clara unfolded it, read the shaky script. Her eyes widened as she realized it was her mother's. Levi said softly, Turns out I'd left everything behind, and now, maybe, I have a chance to walk toward it. Clara looked up. For the first time since she'd walked into the room, she smiled. It wasn't wide, it wasn't easy, but it was real. Clara didn't rush her decision. For days she went about her teaching as usual. She graded papers beneath the low amber light in the schoolhouse, listened to children recite their lessons, and rode home alone, in the quiet dusk. But something had changed. not just in her routine but in the way she carried herself. Like some old knot deep inside her had come undone, and she was still figuring out what it meant to breathe without it. She didn't speak much about Levi to anyone, but folks noticed she was softer around the edges. Not weak, Clara never was, but gentler. As if the weight she'd carried so long had shifted and now lived somewhere she could look at, not just bury. Levi didn't press. He didn't come calling, didn't show up at the schoolhouse, or try to force a conversation. He stayed in town, took work hauling freight and mending fences, keeping his distance but never too far. Clara saw him sometimes from the window, moving slow, quiet, like a man who knew he'd stumbled into something precious and didn't want to scare it off. One evening, just as the first flakes of snow began to fall, Clara knocked on the door of the livery stable where Levi had been sleeping in a small back room. He opened it, surprised but not startled. He looked tired, coal dust on his hands, shirt clinging to his shoulders, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. Clara didn't step in right away. She stood in the doorway, hands tucked into her coat sleeves, and said, "My mother, she used to sing this lullaby to me. Something soft, about sparrows and warm kitchens. I never remembered all the words. But you said she hummed while she cooked?" Levi nodded, his voice quiet. "Every night. Mostly to the stew, I think." Clara smiled faintly. "I remember the hum." There was a pause, full of unsaid things. Then she asked, "Would you like to come by the schoolhouse tomorrow evening? I've got extra stew, and I figure maybe we remember her better together than we do apart." Levi's shoulders dropped just a little, like some invisible weight had lifted. "I'd like that," he said. The next night, they sat side by side at the long wooden table in the schoolhouse. The fire crackled behind them, and outside the snow fell quiet and steady over the plains. They didn't say much. Clara set out 2 bowls and tore bread between her fingers. Levi poured water from the tin kettle and lit an extra candle. When they spoke, it was about small things: her students, the stubborn mule he'd been shoeing, the way her mother used to talk to the wind like it was an old friend. And when Clara finally looked at him and asked, "What do I call you?" he didn't answer right away. But she did. "Maybe we start with Levi," she said, "and see where it goes." He smiled, eyes damp but bright. "That sounds just fine." They washed the dishes together in the quiet, hands brushing briefly over the basin. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just 2 people trying to piece together something that had been broken long before either of them had a say in it. Later that night, as Levi walked back to the livery under a sky full of stars, he looked up and whispered a soft thank you to no one in particular. Maybe to Sarah, maybe to Addie, or maybe to the snow, falling like grace on a land that had taken so much but was finally starting to give something back. Winter came heavy and early that year, the kind of cold that made the wood creak in the walls and turned every breath into a ghost. Clara kept the schoolhouse warm for the children, but most days they had to huddle in their coats and read with mittens on. Still, she stayed. And so did Levi. Over the next few weeks, something like a rhythm formed between them. Levi would bring kindling by the schoolhouse, sometimes fresh bread from the widow Thorne, and he always left without waiting for thanks. Clara never asked for help, but she noticed every gesture. She started putting out 2 cups instead of 1 when she made coffee. She cleared the dust off the extra chair by the stove. One day, just after the last student left, Clara found a note on her desk. Folded neat, no name, but she knew the handwriting. It simply said, "The cabin's nearly ready. Just needs someone to call it home." Her hands trembled a little as she held it. That night, she stood in front of the old cabin, her mother's cabin, now restored with sturdy shingles, fresh nails, and a porch swing that swayed gently in the wind. Levi had done it all himself, quietly, without a word. She stepped inside. It still smelled faintly of ash and pine sap. The fire was already going. There were 2 chairs by the hearth and a kettle hanging over the flames. On the table lay a single envelope, this one sealed. Her name was written on the front in careful script. She opened it slowly. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means you came back. It means you saw what I tried to do in the only way I knew how, with my hands, not my mouth. I'll never be the man your mama needed me to be back then, but I can be the one you need now if you want him. You got your mother's fire, and her silence. And I reckon that means you've carried more weight than most should. Let me carry the rest with you. The porch swing is yours, the second chair too, but only if you want it. Levi. Clara folded the letter with careful fingers. She sat down in the second chair. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just let the warmth from the fire fill her bones. And in that quiet moment, she realized she wasn't waiting anymore. For answers, for apologies, for time to make sense of things. She was home. Just before she left, she scratched a small note of her own and tucked it into the edge of the hearth. I'll be back tomorrow. With Stu. That night, Levi found it, and for the first time in his life, the man who'd spent years walking empty trails lay down with something close to peace. The storm came fast. Thick snow rolled in from the northern ridge, swallowing the town in silence. Folks shuttered their homes early, hunkered down with wood stoves crackling and stew simmering low. It was the kind of weather that made even the wind feel like it had teeth. Clara had stayed late at the schoolhouse, helping a student fix a torn coat. She bundled herself tight and lit her lantern for the walk home, boots crunching softly over fresh snow. But just past the old church, she saw someone moving slow along the trail, a figure hunched and limping, barely upright. She hesitated, then hurried forward, holding the lantern high. It was a man, middle-aged, soaked and shivering, face pale beneath a layer of road dust. One hand was clutching something to his chest. Papers, it looked like. But the other reached out blindly when he saw her. Clara caught him before he fell. Easy, she said, voice firm but warm. Let's get you out of the cold. She brought him to the cabin where Levi met them at the door. The man collapsed into the warmth, coughing hard as Clara and Levi helped him to the bed. Hours passed before he came to. He said his name was Matthew Burns. He was a lawyer from Carson City, sent to deliver a letter. The envelope was wrapped in oilskin, worn from travel, sealed with a mark neither Clara nor Levi recognized. Matthew looked at Clara with tired eyes. Your mother wrote this a month before she passed, he said hoarsely. Had it stored with a notary. Paid in advance to have it delivered. If ever someone matching Levi's description turned up, asking about her. Clara's hands shook as she opened it. Levi sat beside her, elbows on knees, staring into the fire. The letter was short. To Clara, if you're holding this, it means he came back. I want you to know, I forgave him long before he knew he needed forgiving. Life has its way of wearing a person down. But even in all the ache, I never once regretted you. Or him. He was a fool, not a villain. And he loved you in the only way he knew. By staying gone, thinking that was safer. Bring him home, sweetheart. You both deserve that. The cabin was silent, except for the soft pop of the fire. Clara folded the letter slowly, pressing her thumb against the creased paper. She knew, Clara whispered. All this time. Levi didn't speak, his jaw clenched, eyes shining. Not with guilt this time, but something else. Something like release. Matthew stayed with them that night, warming, up by the hearth. He spoke gently, sparingly, telling them how Addie had spent her last months, how she taught sewing classes in town, sang at church when her voice was strong enough, and asked after Clara every time someone brought mail from the schoolhouse. Clara stayed up late listening, her face unreadable. But at one point she reached for Levi's hand. He took it, and didn't let go. Spring came quietly that year. No grand thaw, no rushing rivers, just the slow, steady drip of snow turning to earth. Buds poked up along the fence lines. The horses stood calmer in their corrals. The mountains softened at the edges. In the cabin on the ridge, Levi was building something again. This time, not alone. Clara stood beside him, sleeves rolled, brow furrowed as she measured boards and hammered nails. She had her mother's sure hands and her own way of holding silence, but something had changed. She smiled more, spoke with ease. And sometimes, when she wasn't looking, Levi just watched her, like he still couldn't believe she'd come back, and stayed. They were building a new room onto the side of the cabin. Not for themselves, not exactly. For something bigger. It started with a letter. A child from the schoolhouse, Sammy, was being sent away. His parents had both taken sick and passed by midwinter, and there was no kin to take him. The county wanted to move him to the city orphanage. Clara didn't hesitate. He stays here, she told the town council. He's mine now, and they knew better than to argue. When she told Levi, he only nodded once, then went to sharpen his tools. They finished the room in a week. Sammy arrived with a single satchel, a tattered coat, and eyes too old for his age. But that first night he saw the fire, smelled bread baking, and noticed the second chair beside the stove already waiting for him. He didn't say much, just sat close to the flames, staring at them like they might burn away whatever he carried. Levi leaned in. "You like stories?" he asked. The boy nodded. "Well," Levi said, settling into his chair, "I got one that starts with a fire, too, a long time ago, changed everything," and he began to tell it, not as a confession, but as a gift. Clara sat nearby, sewing, listening quietly, not to judge, but to remember. That night, as the fire burned low and the cabin settled around them like a blanket, Clara slipped the old letter, her mother's letter, into a small wooden box and placed it on the shelf. Next to it she put a framed drawing Sammy had made, a cabin with 3 windows lit up and a figure at each one. "Looks like home," Levi said, glancing at it. Clara smiled softly. "It is." Outside, the wind had gone still. In town, folks said the Ridge House had a light in the window every night now. And some swore, if you walked by slow enough you could hear laughter, gentle, quiet, but real. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was healing. And in that cabin where once there was fire and loss, now there was warmth and second chances, and the kind of love that doesn't arrive loud but lingers long. If this story warmed something in you, share it with someone who might need it too. And if you've ever believed in second chances, maybe leave a comment to tell us why. We'd sure love to hear it.